That pink fluffy salad your aunt brought to every funeral, gone. The cheese log your mother made every Christmas, extinct.
Results? A perky new dish from a dependable old favorite.
Betty Crocker's 30 most beloved party foods, the ones that said, "Someone loves you enough to cook," murdered by convenience culture. But one of these foods is secretly making a comeback. Picture this, a crystal-clear molded masterpiece, trembling on your grandmother's best cut glass pedestal plate. Inside, suspended like stained glass windows, perfect cubes of red, green, and orange jello, floating in a cloud of whipped cream and pineapple. The crown jewel gelatin salad wasn't just food. It was architecture. It was 4 hours of your mother's Saturday morning, carefully timing each layer to set it exactly the right consistency. The sound it made when the vacuum seal broke, that gentle whoosh as she inverted the mold and prayed to Betty Crocker herself that it would release cleanly. Remember how the whole kitchen would go silent? Even Dad knew not to walk too heavily across the floor while Mom was unmolding. One wrong vibration and Sunday's church potluck centerpiece would be a pile of Technicolor rubble. This wasn't just jello. This was your mother proving she could create something elegant from boxes and packets, something that would make Mrs. Henderson from 2 pews over lean in and whisper, "How did you get those cubes so perfect?" The secret was in the timing. Each colored batch had to be precisely between liquid and solid when you cut it, firm enough to hold edges, but soft enough to bind later. Betty Crocker featured this recipe in 23 different publications between 1959 and 1981. It required 6 boxes of jello, a full pint of heavy cream, and the patience of a saint. The recipe promised it served 12. It never made it past 8. People would heap their plates with this shimmering beauty. It vanished when we decided 4 hours was too long to spend on something that would disappear in 4 minutes. When potlucks became places for store-bought cookies and 2-liter sodas instead of competitions of love measured in effort, the crown jewel didn't disappear. We just stopped thinking we deserved crowns. But if crown jewel was the queen of the gelatin family, wait until you hear what happened to her working-class cousin that started fights at every family reunion. Nobody knows why they called it Watergate salad. Some say it was because it was full of nuts and marshmallows, a cover-up of what salad really meant. Others claim it appeared the same week as the scandal broke. But every aunt in America had her own story, told while she folded those mini marshmallows into that otherworldly green mixture that looked like something from a science fiction movie, but tasted like childhood itself. The recipe was deceptively simple. Instant pistachio pudding, Cool Whip, crushed pineapple, marshmallows, and nuts. 5 ingredients. 5 minutes. But oh, the debates it started. Walnuts or pecans? Drain the pineapple completely or leave it a little wet? Mini marshmallows or cut up the big ones? These weren't just preferences. They were family doctrines passed down through generations like heirloom jewelry. You could track the social hierarchy of any church basement by the Watergate salads. Martha's was always too runny. Bless her heart, she never could follow directions. Jennifer's had mandarin oranges, which everyone agreed was just showing off. But when old Mrs. Kowalski brought hers, in that yellow Tupperware bowl with the lid that hadn't sealed right since 1973, everyone knew that was the one. She added just a whisper of vanilla extract. Not in any recipe, just something she knew. The green. Lord, that green. No color in nature matched it. It was the color of mint chip ice cream's radioactive cousin. Kids would dare each other to eat spoonfuls, not knowing they were eating something their grandmothers considered fancy. It appeared at every funeral next to the ham sandwiches, at every graduation beside the sheet cake, at every Easter dinner between the ham and the rolls. Kraft Foods tried to rename it Pistachio Pineapple Delight in 1983. Nobody called it that. Watergate salad was a survivor, lasting longer than the scandal itself, appearing at potlucks well into the Clinton administration. It died quietly somewhere around 2003, when someone decided marshmallows didn't belong in salad and pistachio pudding was too artificial. The thing is, Watergate salad wasn't really about the taste. It was about having something green on the table that kids would actually eat. Something that counted as salad to make the meal feel balanced, even though everyone knew it was basically dessert playing dress-up, speaking of things that didn't make sense. The next dish literally had impossible in its name, yet every Betty Crocker devotee swore by its magic. Impossible coconut pie was Betty Crocker's greatest magic trick. You dumped eggs, milk, biscuit, butter, and coconut into a blender, poured the mess into a pie pan, and somehow, through some act of kitchen alchemy that nobody quite understood, it separated into 3 distinct layers while baking: crust on bottom, custard in the middle, golden coconut on top. It was called impossible because it shouldn't have worked, but it did, every single time. The recipe card got passed around like contraband. Women would whisper about it at grocery stores, pulling crumpled index cards from their purses. "Have you tried the impossible pie?" they'd ask, like they were sharing state secrets. The first time you made it, you'd check the oven every 5 minutes, certain this would be the time it failed, the time you'd have to serve scrambled egg soup to your bridge club. But then you'd pull it out, and there it was, perfect layers, like you'd spent hours on some French pastry technique instead of 30 seconds with a blender that hadn't been cleaned since you made daiquiris last summer. The coconut would be toasted just right on top, those little golden edges that tasted like macaroons and made your kitchen smell like a bakery in heaven. Men loved this pie. Something about coconut custard spoke to fathers who otherwise wouldn't touch dessert. They'd have 1 piece after dinner, then sneak down at midnight for another, eating it straight from the pan with a fork, the refrigerator light making shadows on the kitchen wall. Kids would find the empty pan in the morning and know Dad had been there. Betty Crocker published 17 variations. Impossible chocolate pie, impossible lemon pie, impossible taco pie, which was basically the same idea but with ground beef and cheese, because it was the 70s and everything was impossible and anything could be a pie. But coconut was the original, the miracle, the one that made new brides feel like they could actually do this cooking thing. It disappeared when we stopped believing in kitchen magic, when recipes needed explanations and science and molecular gastronomy, when impossible became a challenge instead of a promise. The back of the Ritz cracker box, 1934. The Great Depression was destroying America, and nobody could afford apples. But Nabisco had a proposal that sounded like madness. What if you could make apple pie without apples, using Ritz crackers, sugar syrup, and lemon juice? American housewives could create something that tasted so much like apple pie, their families would never know they were eating poverty dressed up as dessert. It should have disappeared after the Depression ended. It didn't. It thrived through the 40s, flourished in the 50s, and by the time Betty Crocker put it in her cookbook in 1961, mock apple pie had become something else entirely. It wasn't about poverty anymore. It was about the secret, the thrill of serving it to guests and waiting, just waiting, for someone to take that first bite. "These apples are perfect," they'd say. "What variety did you use?" And you'd stand there in your good apron, the one without the stains, holding back a smile that threatened to split your face in half. "Oh, it's an old family recipe," you'd say, which wasn't technically a lie. The crackers would soften in the syrup, taking on this texture that was eerily, impossibly apple-like. The lemon juice added the tartness, the sugar provided the sweet, and the cinnamon did what cinnamon always does, made everything feel like autumn and mother's love and home. People swore they could taste apple. They'd insist on it, even after you revealed the trick, even after you showed them the empty Ritz box. Making mock apple pie became a rite of passage, like learning to drive or getting your ears pierced. Mothers would teach daughters, usually on a rainy Saturday when there was nothing on TV and Dad was fixing something in the garage. "Now watch," they'd say, crushing those crackers just so. "Too fine and it'll be mushy, too coarse and people will know." The recipe survived World War II, Korea, Vietnam. It survived the health food movement of the 70s, the gourmet explosion of the 80s, even the low-carb madness of the 90s, but it couldn't survive transparency. Once we started reading ingredients, questioning everything, demanding authenticity, mock apple pie became embarrassing. But those of us who remember know the truth. Mock apple pie was never about fooling anyone. It was about transformation, about taking 20 cents worth of crackers and turning them into something that made people happy. The funny thing is, apples were never really the point, just like cheese wasn't really the point of the next dish that turned processed food into party legend. Betty Crocker's beer cheese soup, served in a hollowed-out round of sourdough, wasn't just food. It was dinner theater. The bread bowl would arrive at the table like a prop from a medieval feast, steam rising from the center, the edges of bread already starting to soften and sag, with the weight of that glorious, golden soup that tasted like Wisconsin and comfort, and Friday night when Dad got his paycheck. The recipe called for processed American cheese, which food snobs today would revolt against. But in 1974, processed cheese was space-age technology. It melted smooth as silk, never got grainy, and turned that beer into something that coated the back of your spoon like liquid gold. You'd add cheap beer, whatever Dad had in the fridge, usually something that came in a white can with blue letters, and suddenly your kitchen smelled like the fanciest restaurant in town. Hollowing out the bread bowl was an art form. Too aggressive and you'd punch through the bottom, creating a cheese soup flood that would ruin the tablecloth your mother-in-law gave you for Christmas. Too conservative and there wasn't enough room for soup, and people would fill up on bread before they got to the good stuff. The perfect bowl had walls exactly 3/4 of an inch thick, enough to hold the soup for 20 minutes before starting the glorious breakdown. Kids would fight over who got to eat the bottom of the bowl, that piece that had soaked up the most soup, transformed from bread into some hybrid creation that was neither solid nor liquid, but something altogether more perfect. Adults would pretend they were above such squabbles while secretly timing their soup consumption to ensure maximum bottom bowl saturation. The genius wasn't the soup or the bowl. It was the combination, the way the bread slowly incorporated itself into the meal, how each spoonful got progressively more bread-filled until you weren't eating soup anymore but some primitive cheese bread porridge that connected you to ancestors you never knew you had. By the end, you were tearing off chunks of bowl and using them as spoons, your hands covered in cheese, your dignity abandoned somewhere around the third bite. Betty Crocker suggested serving this at casual entertaining occasions, but everybody knew beer cheese soup in a bread bowl was for when your husband's boss came to dinner, when you needed to prove you were sophisticated but approachable, fancy but not threatening. It was the perfect middle-class flex. It died when carbs became the enemy, when gluten became poison, when we decided bread bowls were too much work for too many calories. Panera tried to keep it alive. 7 layers. 7 perfect, distinct layers of alternating cream cheese and colorful jello, standing tall in a glass dish like a geological sample from a more delicious planet. Ribbon salad wasn't just a recipe. It was an engineering project that required graph paper, a timer, and the kind of spatial reasoning skills they tested for in aerospace programs. Each layer had to be exactly the right temperature before adding the next. Too warm and the layers would bleed together into a muddy mess. Too cold and they wouldn't adhere, and your beautiful ribbon would split apart when served like tectonic plates during an earthquake. The cream cheese layers needed to be beaten until fluffy, but not too thin. sweetened but not too much, and spread with the precision of someone frosting a wedding cake for royalty. Women would start these on Thursday for Saturday's party. Layer 1 went in at 8 a.m. after the kids left for school. Layer 2 at 10 a.m. during the first commercial break of The Price is Right. By evening, you'd have 4 layers done, the refrigerator door opening and closing so many times that Dad would complain about the electric bill. Friday was for the final layers and the praying. The colors told stories. Red and green for Christmas, orange and black for Halloween, blue and white for the church's anniversary. But the advanced practitioners knew the secret combinations. Lime with cream cheese mixed with crushed pineapple. Strawberry with cream cheese folded with real strawberries. Lemon with cream cheese beaten with a hint of vanilla that would make people stop mid-bite. The moment of truth came at serving. You'd carry it to the table like you were holding nitroglycerin, then cut that first square with a knife dipped in hot water, lifting it out to reveal those perfect stripes like sedimentary rock laid down over millennia instead of 2 days in a Kenmore refrigerator. Bisquick, Jimmy Dean sausage, sharp cheddar cheese, 3 ingredients that, when combined in equal parts and baked for 18 minutes at 375 degrees, created something that transcended its humble origins. Sausage balls were the great equalizer. They appeared at country club cocktail parties and trailer park potlucks, at Southern Baptist church socials and Northern Catholic wedding receptions. The mixing had to be done by hand. This was crucial. You'd dump everything in your biggest bowl, the one that usually held popcorn on movie night, and then you'd dive in with both hands like you were kneading bread for Jesus himself. The sausage was cold, straight from the fridge, and it would make your fingers ache, but you couldn't use a spoon. The warmth of your hands was what made the cheese cooperate. 10 minutes of squishing and squeezing, your wedding ring covered in sausage fat, your forearms burning. Rolling them was meditation, each ball exactly walnut-sized. Too big, and the centers would be raw. Too small, and they'd dry out. You'd line them up on cookie sheets like little soldiers, perfectly spaced, because even though they didn't spread, you were the kind of person who did things right. By the time you were done, you'd have 100 perfect spheres and fingernails that would smell like breakfast sausage for 3 days, no matter how many times you washed them. But here's what made them magic: the transformation in the oven. They went in as dense little meatballs and came out as golden orbs with crispy, craggy surfaces that held on to heat like tiny ceramics kilns. The cheese would bubble out in places, creating these crispy cheese corners that people would fight over, like the last lifeboat on the Titanic. The bottoms would be dark brown and crunchy, the tops golden and slightly soft, and the inside would be molten sausage cheese lava. Every Southern woman had a secret. Some added a dash of Worcestershire, others mixed in ranch dressing powder or a hint of garlic. But the real secret, the one nobody talked about, was that they were best at room temperature, when the flavors had mellowed and merged, when you could eat 17 of them without realizing it. Sausage balls disappeared gradually, then suddenly. First, we decided Bisquick was processed food. Then we learned what was really in Jimmy Dean sausage. Then someone pointed out that each ball was approximately 40,000 calories. They lingered at Southern gatherings longer than anywhere else, holding on like the last Confederate soldier who didn't know the war was over. The truth is, sausage balls were perfect because they were excessive. 3 cups of cheese for 1 pound of sausage, no vegetables, no apologies, no nutritional value whatsoever. They were party food from an era when parties were about joy, not about performing your dietary virtue for Instagram. Speaking of things we've lost, the next dish was so complicated it came with its own special pan that every wedding registry included until 1987. The tunnel of fudge cake didn't just win second place in the 1966 Pillsbury Bake-Off, it changed the entire trajectory of American baking. Ella Helfrich from Houston created something that shouldn't have worked, a cake with a liquid center that wasn't undercooked but was somehow, impossibly, meant to be that way. It was like she'd discovered fire, except the fire was chocolate and it lived inside a cake. The recipe required a bundt pan, which nobody owned in 1966. Within a year, bundt pan sales increased by 200,000%. That's not a typo. Hardware stores couldn't keep them in stock. Nordic Ware, the company that made them, had to run their factories 24 hours a day. Women would drive 3 towns over when they heard a shipment had come in. But here's what the recipe didn't tell you. The tunnel of fudge cake was temperamental as a thoroughbred. Your oven had to be exactly 350 degrees, not 349, not 351. The frosting, oh, the frosting. It was just powdered sugar and cocoa and milk, but you'd beat it until it was glossy as patent leather, then pour it over the still warm cake so it would run down those bundt ridges like chocolate waterfalls. The cake would sit on your best cake plate, the one that rotated, that musical one you got for your wedding. When you cut into it, that first slice would reveal the tunnel, a ring of barely set chocolate that oozed onto the plate like the Earth's core had been made of fudge all along. People would gasp, actually gasp, like you'd performed surgery or solved world hunger. That tunnel was your triumph, your validation, your proof that you could follow directions and create magic. Now, if Tunnel of Fudge was about mystery, the next creation was about honesty. It literally had crap in the name, and nobody cared because it was just that good. Every family called it something different: Christmas crap, Christmas crack, white trash candy, reindeer food. But whatever name you used, the recipe was the same: saltine crackers, butter, brown sugar, and chocolate chips. 4 ingredients that had no business being together, creating something so addictive that people would hide batches from their own families, eating it in the laundry room while pretending to fold towels. The process was alchemy. You'd line a jelly roll pan with saltines, edge to edge like you were tiling a bathroom. Then you'd boil butter and brown sugar for exactly 3 minutes, not 2 minutes and 50 seconds, not 3 minutes and 10 seconds, but 3 minutes exactly, until it transformed into something that looked like motor oil but smelled like heaven had a candy factory. You'd pour this molten toffee over the crackers, watching it seep into every crack and crevice, transforming those 29-cent saltines into something that would cost $20 a pound at a fancy candy store. Into the oven for 5 minutes, just until the edges started to bubble like a witch's cauldron, then out came the pan and on went the chocolate chips. The chocolate would melt from the heat of the toffee, and you'd spread it with a spatula, trying not to disturb the crackers underneath. But the magic happened in the freezer. 15 minutes of Arctic blast transformed this mess into something that would crack like safety glass when you broke it apart. Each piece was different, some all chocolate, some heavy on the toffee, some with that perfect ratio that made you close your eyes and consider starting a candy company. The thing about Christmas crap was that everyone thought their family invented it. Moving from the sweet to the savory, the next dish proved that mayonnaise could be a frosting if you just believed hard enough. The frosted ribbon loaf was a sandwich that thought it was a wedding cake. 3 layers of different fillings between white bread, the whole thing frosted with cream cheese mixed with mayonnaise, decorated with radish roses and olive slices. It was the most labor-intensive sandwich in human history. You started with a whole loaf of white bread, not pre-sliced, but an actual loaf. You had to cut yourself into perfect lengthwise layers. This required a knife longer than most people owned and the steady hand of a cardiac surgeon. Layer 1, egg salad. Layer 2, ham salad made by grinding leftover Easter ham. Layer 3, chicken salad with microscopic celery and grapes. Each layer had to be spread to the exact edges, then the whole thing went into the refrigerator overnight, wrapped in damp towels. The next morning came the frosting, cream cheese beaten with mayonnaise until fluffy, with gelatin mixed in so it would hold its shape. You'd spread this over the entire loaf, creating swirls and peaks. Each piece revealed those perfect layers. The cream cheese frosting held everything together while adding tangy richness that made people take a second slice. It died when we decided sandwiches should be handheld, when cream cheese frosting on meat became weird instead of elegant, when spending 6 hours on a sandwich became a sign of too much time instead of love. Speaking of showing off, the next dish required you to own a specific appliance that every wedding registry included, but nobody knew how to use. Cheese fondue came to America via Switzerland, but Betty Crocker made it suburban. By 1975, every garage sale had at least 3 fondue pots, their boxes still wrapped in wedding paper, fonts screaming "Harvest Gold" and "Avocado Green." Betty Crocker knew American supermarkets didn't stock Gruyere in 1969. Her secret recipe used Velveeta, beer, and garlic powder, creating something that wouldn't break, wouldn't separate, and wouldn't require a second mortgage. The ritual was everything. You'd set up the fondue pot in the middle of the table like an altar, that little sterno flame flickering. The long forks, everyone fighting over the ones with different colored tips, even though everyone would forget which was theirs after the second glass of wine. You'd cube French bread with crust on one side so you had something for the fork to grab. The advanced hosts would leave it out overnight to get slightly stale, which held onto the cheese better. The double-dipping taboo created strange intimacy. You were all essentially kissing via cheese, sharing germs and gossip while pretending this was sophisticated European dining. But here's what nobody talks about: the cheese fondue hangover. You'd wake up feeling like you'd swallowed a bowling ball made of cheese, but you'd do it again next month because fondue parties were the most fun you could have with your clothes on in 1974. Fondue died when we realized communal eating was unsanitary, when double-dipping became a cardinal sin, when cheese became the enemy. But while fondue brought people together around one pot, the next dish brought them together around pure spectacle. The shrimp tree wasn't food, it was architecture. A styrofoam cone wrapped in aluminum foil, stabbed with toothpicks, each one holding a perfectly cooked shrimp, creating an edible Christmas tree that cost more than the actual Christmas tree in your living room. Betty Crocker's 1971 Holiday Entertaining featured it on the cover. The recipe required 5 pounds of large shrimp, which in 1971 meant taking out a small loan or saving for 3 months. The engineering was precise. You started at the bottom with the largest shrimp, spiraling up the cone, each toothpick at exactly the same angle so the shrimp tails flared out like pink petals. At the top, you'd place a star, cut from a yellow bell pepper. Around the base, you'd arrange parsley like grass. Some women would spray the whole thing with unflavored gelatin mixed with water, creating a glaze that made the shrimp glisten. The cocktail sauce lived in a hollowed-out red cabbage beside the tree. The cabbage had to be carved just right, deep enough to hold a pint of sauce, but not so deep it would collapse. Guests would circle the shrimp tree like pagans around a maypole, not wanting to be the first to destroy its perfection. Eventually, someone's husband would grab one from the middle, causing a small avalanche. The shrimp tree died when shrimp stopped being special, when you could get a pound for $4.99 at Costco, when we stopped believing that food presentation was worth 2 hours of work for 7 minutes of appreciation. From the heights of the shrimp tree, we moved to the democracy of the next dish. Pigs in a blanket were the great pretender of party foods. Every host apologized for them. I just threw together some pigs in a blanket. while carefully wrapping their 40th cocktail wiener in precisely cut crescent roll dough. The smell, when they baked, could summon children from 3 houses away. You'd put the first batch on the counter to cool and turn around to find them gone. There was an art to the wrapping. Too much dough, and they were bready. Too little, and the dough would split. The perfect ratio was 1 triangle of dough per 2 cocktail wieners cut in half. Pigs in a blanket transcended class boundaries. They appeared at PTA meetings and embassy parties, at Super Bowl gatherings and wedding receptions. They never really died, just evolved. Now they're pastry-wrapped artisanal sausages at gastropubs, $20 for 6, but it's not the same. The magic was in the transgression. While pigs in a blanket embraced their processed nature, the next dish tried to elevate ham into something worthy of a magazine cover. Ham and pickle rolls, called Minnesota sushi by people who'd never seen sushi, were the Midwest's answer to hors d'oeuvres: deli ham, cream cheese, and a dill pickle spear. That's it. The ham couldn't be too thick or it wouldn't roll. Too thin and it would tear. It had to be that exact deli thickness, what the butcher called number 3 on the slicer. The cream cheese needed to be room temperature, spreadable as soft butter. The pickle had to be a Vlasic dill spear. You'd pat it dry like you were preparing it for surgery. You'd spread the cream cheese to the very edges, lay the pickle at one end, and roll it tight. Then into the refrigerator for at least 2 hours, until everything firmed up enough to slice into perfect half-inch rounds. Ham and pickle rolls appeared at every graduation party, every funeral lunch, every event where Lutherans gathered. They were the first thing gone from the appetizer table. They died when we decided cream cheese and ham together was too much fat, when pickles became artisanal and cost $12 a jar. Next came a dip that was literally just 7 ingredients, but somehow caused more family feuds than any inheritance. 7-layer dip was Mexican food interpreted by someone who'd never been to Mexico, served at parties by people who pronounced jalapeno with a hard J. But authenticity wasn't the point. The point was, you could see all 7 layers through the glass dish. Betty Crocker's recipe was canonical: refried beans, sour cream mixed with taco seasoning, guacamole, shredded cheese, chopped tomatoes, green onions, and black olives, always in that order. The dish had to be clear glass, Pyrex, specifically the 9A13 everyone got as a wedding present. The layers needed to be distinct, each one spread carefully to the edges. The guacamole layer caused the most stress. You had to make it thick enough that it wouldn't sink, but thin enough to spread. This was before stores sold guacamole, so you were mashing avocados with a fork, knowing you had exactly 4 hours before it looked like something from a horror movie. The eating strategy divided people into camps. The excavators went straight down. The strip miners took from one side. Surprise meatloaf had a whole hard-boiled egg running through its center, so when you sliced it, each piece had a yellow and white bullseye staring back at you. Betty Crocker Americanized it. Her recipe used ground beef, Campbell's tomato soup, crushed saltines, and 4 hard-boiled eggs arranged in a line. The construction required spatial reasoning. You'd press half the meat into the loaf pan, make a valley down the middle, nestle the eggs in a perfect line, then cover them like you were burying treasure. The reveal was everything. You'd bring it to the table whole, then slice it, and people would gasp at those perfect circles of egg. Kids either loved it or were terrified by it. Some thought it was like finding prizes in cereal. Others refused to eat what they called eyeball meatloaf. Surprise. Meatloaf disappeared when we decided surprises in food were unwelcome, when transparency became a virtue. Nobody hides whole eggs in meat anymore. Speaking of practical jokes, the next dish made people question whether you'd made dessert or cleaned out the refrigerator. Ambrosia was what happened when the gods ate leftovers: mandarin oranges, coconut, marshmallows, maraschino cherries, and pineapple chunks, all suspended in Cool Whip and sour cream. Every family had their own version, defended with the passion of religious doctrine. The real controversy was the marshmallow situation: mini marshmallows or big ones cut up. Making ambrosia was meditation for Methodist women. You'd drain the mandarin oranges, but save the juice for something, nobody knew what. Everything got folded, never stirred, into the Cool Whip mixture. It had to sit overnight. Fresh ambrosia was just fruit with stuff on it, but after 8 hours, something magical happened. The marshmallows absorbed the fruit juice and swelled up. The flavors merged into something that tasted pink, even though it was mostly white. Ambrosia died when we decided marshmallows didn't belong in salad, when Cool Whip became a punchline, when fresh and seasonal replaced canned and convenient. But while ambrosia mixed everything together, our next dish was about keeping things strictly separated. Vegetable pizza wasn't pizza at all. It was a lie we all agreed to believe. Crescent roll crust pressed flat, baked, cooled, then slathered with cream cheese mixed with ranch powder and topped with raw vegetables cut confetti small. We called it pizza so men and children would eat it. It worked. The cream cheese mixture was the real hero. Philadelphia cream cheese, Hidden Valley ranch powder, and just enough mayonnaise to make it spreadable. This was before ranch was a lifestyle. Vegetables had to be cut impossibly small: broccoli florets the size of pencil erasers. Everything had to be the same size, so you'd get a bit of everything in each bite. Vegetable pizza appeared at every baby shower, every event where women gathered and needed to pretend vegetables were fun. It was healthy food in disguise. It died when we admitted vegetables could taste good on their own, when ranch became so ubiquitous it lost its power. From fake pizza to fake crab, the next dish made seafood accessible to people who lived 1,000 miles from any sea. Seafood mousse was what happened when Betty Crocker discovered food processors and decided everything should be pured, molded, and unmolded. It was canned salmon, cream cheese, and unflavored gelatin whipped into submission, poured into a fish-shaped mold. The recipe always started with dissolve gelatin in hot clam juice, which was the most terrifying opening to any recipe ever written. The salmon was the shameful part. Canned salmon with those little round bones that you were supposed to mash up because they were good calcium, but really, you picked them out one by one. Into the food processor it all went. The picked-over salmon, cream cheese, mayonnaise, lemon juice, onion powder, and hot sauce. The unmolding happened in front of everyone because you needed witnesses to your triumph. That wet suction pop when it released was your applause. Decoration was crucial. Olive slices for eyes, cucumber scales, a lemon twist for a mouth, giving your fish a surprised expression that matched your guests' faces. Seafood mousse died when we realized seafood shouldn't be beige, shouldn't wobble, shouldn't be shaped like the animal it came from. Next up was a casserole that was neither chicken nor king, but somehow ruled every potluck. The unmolding happened in front of everyone because you needed witnesses to your triumph. You'd run a knife around the edges, place the serving platter on top, say a quick prayer, and flip. That sound, the wet suction pop when it released, was your applause. Decoration was crucial. Olive slices for eyes, cucumber scales overlapping like armor, a lemon twist for a mouth, giving your fish a surprised expression that matched your guests' faces. Seafood mousse died when we realized seafood shouldn't be beige, shouldn't wobble, shouldn't be shaped like the animal it came from. When mousse became something chocolate, not something fishy. Next up was a casserole that was neither chicken nor king, but somehow ruled every potluck. Chicken a la king was fancy food for people who pronounced filet with a hard T. It was chicken and mushrooms and pimientos swimming in white sauce, served over toast points or in puff pastry shells that came frozen in a box and never quite cooked all the way through. Betty Crocker's recipe started with leftover chicken, which was code for That dried-out bird from Sunday that nobody wants to eat, you'd dice it into cubes so small nobody could tell it was 3 days old. The mushrooms were canned. Fresh mushrooms were for people who shopped at specialty stores. The sauce was a production, butter and flour cooked until it smelled nutty, then chicken broth added slowly while you whisked like your life depended on it, because lumps in your white sauce meant lumps in your reputation. Cream went in next, or half and half if you were watching your figure. Pimientos were the mystery ingredient. Nobody knew what pimientos were, where they came from, why they existed. They lived in tiny jars near the olives, these red strips that tasted like nothing but turned everything festive. The serving vessel mattered. Toast points, if you were basic. Puff pastry shells, if you were trying. But the real show was the chafing dish, that silver-plated contraption you got as a wedding gift and used twice a year. People would line up with their plates, those divided paper plates, that kept the chicken a la king from touching the salad, though it didn't matter because that sauce would escape its borders, covering everything in its creamy advance. Chicken a la king died when we learned the king was made up. When we discovered France had never heard of this dish, when a la became a joke instead of sophistication. When we realized cream sauce was just flour and fat, and we were all lactose intolerant anyway. Speaking of magic, the next dish literally set itself on fire. Cherry's Jubilee was dinner theater where the dinner might burn your house down. You'd roll out the cart. Everyone had a bar cart in 1972, heat cherries in a chafing dish, add brandy, and light it on fire while your guests sat 3 feet away, wondering if your homeowner's insurance was paid up. Betty Crocker's recipe tried to tame it, suggesting you could carefully ignite with a long match. But everyone knew Cherry's Jubilee was Russian roulette with fruit. The brandy had to be warm, but not too warm, too cold, and it wouldn't light, too hot, and you'd singe your eyebrows off. The cherries were the easy part. A can of Bing cherries, drained but saved the juice, heated with sugar and cornstarch until glossy. Some people used fresh cherries, but those people also made their own pasta and grew their own wheat. The performance was everything. You'd dim the lights. Someone always dimmed the lights, like you were about to seance instead of flambe. Pour the brandy over the hot cherries, and then the moment, the lighting, that beautiful blue flame dancing over the fruit while everyone made the same ooh sound they made at fireworks. But here's what nobody mentions. Half the time it didn't light. You'd stand there with your long match, touching it to increasingly cool brandy, while your guests watched with polite sympathy. "It's the humidity," someone would say, though nobody knew if humidity affected brandy flammability. The successful Cherry's Jubilee was talked about for years. Remember when Martha's cherries went up 3 feet high? These weren't cautionary tales. They were legends, proof that you'd lived dangerously, that your dinner parties had stakes. Cherry's Jubilee died when insurance companies started asking specific questions, when smoke detectors became mandatory, when we realized setting food on fire for entertainment was something only restaurants with good ventilation should attempt. If Cherry's Jubilee was about fire, the next dish was about ice. Specifically, keeping things cold in the most impractical way possible. The ice bowl was the ultimate flex. You'd freeze water between 2 nested bowls, creating a serving vessel made entirely of ice that would slowly melt throughout your party, dripping onto your tablecloth while you pretended this was intentional. This was elegant. Betty Crocker's instructions read like a physics textbook. The inner bowl had to be weighted down with pie weights or coins wrapped in plastic bags. The water between the bowls needed to be distilled, or your ice bowl would be cloudy, and cloudy ice was for people who didn't read the instructions. The shrimp preparation was secondary to the bowl, but it still mattered. You'd buy the biggest shrimp you could afford and cook them in water with Old Bay seasoning, because Old Bay was to shrimp what holy water was to Catholics, essential and unquestioned. The cocktail sauce lived in the center of the ice bowl, in a smaller bowl that would gradually sink as its frozen platform melted. You'd make the sauce from scratch: ketchup, horseradish, Worcestershire, lemon juice, and hot sauce. The assembly happened minutes before guests arrived, because ice, unlike revenge, was best served immediately. You'd unmold the ice bowl, running warm water over the outside bowl, praying to the god of thermal dynamics, then position it on a silver tray with a lip to catch the inevitable melt. As the party progressed, the bowl would melt, slowly at first, then faster as the room warmed. By hour 2, you'd be discreetly mopping up water with cocktail napkins. But nobody cared, because ice bowls were about the effort, the absolute insanity of serving food in frozen water. The ice bowl died when we realized ice was for drinks, not architecture. When we discovered insulated serving dishes, when we admitted that function might occasionally triumph over form. Grasshopper pie was what happened when Girl Scouts grew up and started drinking. That bright green filling wasn't mint. It was crème de menthe, the same stuff your grandmother kept in the cabinet for medicinal purposes. This was alcoholic dessert before anyone admitted dessert could be alcoholic. The crust was chocolate wafers crushed to dust and mixed with butter. Nabisco famous chocolate wafers, specifically, not Oreos, never Oreos, because Oreos had filling, and this wasn't amateur hour. The filling required a quarter cup of crème de menthe and 3 tablespoons of crème de cacao, which meant a trip to the liquor store where you'd stand in the liqueur aisle, looking confused. Marshmallows, an entire bag of them, got melted with milk in a double boiler, while you stirred and wondered how something so simple could take so long to melt. Then you'd cool it until it was just starting to set, fold in the liqueurs and whipped cream, creating something the color of mint toothpaste, if toothpaste could get you drunk. The pie went into the freezer, not the refrigerator, because grasshopper pie needed to be cold as a Minnesota winter. You'd serve it straight from frozen, watching people's faces as they bit into what they expected to be mint, and got a face full of alcohol instead. The beauty was the color, that atomic green that existed nowhere in nature, that made the whole table look like St. Patrick's Day even in July. You'd garnish with chocolate shavings if you were fancy, or chocolate chips if you were honest. Grasshopper pie disappeared when DUI laws got serious, when day drinking stopped being socially acceptable, when we realized giving desserts cocktail names didn't make them sophisticated. Now we have bourbon pecan pie and wine ice cream. But we're honest about it. But mostly, grasshopper pie died when bridge clubs died, when afternoon gatherings became play dates instead of escapes, when women went back to work and didn't have time to melt marshmallows on a Tuesday afternoon. The cheese log was a missile of processed cheese rolled in nuts, the party appetizer that looked like something from a lumber yard, but tasted like the 1970s had achieved perfection. 2 packages of cream cheese, a jar of pimiento cheese spread, a packet of ranch dressing mix, and enough chopped pecans to coat the outside. You'd mix the cheeses and ranch powder with your electric mixer until it was smooth as political promises, then plop it onto plastic wrap and roll it into a log shape, using the wrap to compress and form it. Into the refrigerator overnight. The pecans had to be chopped just right. Too fine, and they'd disappear into the cheese. Too coarse, and they'd fall off when someone tried to spread it. The cheese log died when we learned to pronounce charcuterie and decided cheese should be artisanal, not logged, when nuts became a separate course, not a coating. Now cheese comes on boards, not as boards. Before buffalo wings conquered America, there were Betty Crocker's grape jelly wings, chicken wings simmered in a sauce made from grape jelly and chili sauce. A combination that sounded like a pregnancy craving, but tasted like everything right with the world. The recipe was insane in its simplicity. 1 jar of grape jelly, Welch's, always Welch's, and 1 bottle of Heinz chili sauce, which was like ketchup's spicy cousin who'd traveled abroad and come back interesting. You'd dump both in a pot, watch purple and red swirl together, and wonder what you were doing with your life. The wings went in frozen, straight from the freezer into the sauce. They'd simmer for 45 minutes, the sauce slowly penetrating the chicken, the kitchen filling with a smell that made no sense but made everyone hungry. The transformation was alchemy. The grape jelly lost its childish sweetness, became something deeper. The chili sauce gave up its ketchup pretensions. Together they created a glaze that was glossy as patent leather, sticky as a theater floor, addictive as whatever they put in Cool Ranch Doritos. You'd serve them piled on a platter, garnished with nothing, because what would you garnish them with? Grapes? The sauce pooled at the bottom, and people would drag their wings through it for extra coating, their fingers turning purple-red. These wings disappeared when buffalo wings arrived from New York like cavalry, when ranch and blue cheese dressing became the only acceptable wing accompaniments. But everyone who tasted them remembers that sweet, savory, sticky tomato aspic. Tomato aspic was gazpacho that went to law school. Cold tomato soup that decided to become solid, respectable, something you could slice. It wiggled on the plate like it was nervous about being there. The base was tomato juice, unflavored gelatin, and the kinds of seasonings that made Bloody Marys worth drinking. Worcestershire, hot sauce, celery salt, lemon juice. Some people added V8, which was cheating but understandable. The vegetables suspended inside were diced smaller than confetti: celery, onion, green pepper, sometimes olives. They had to be distributed evenly, which meant stirring gently as the aspic set. The mold mattered. Aspic demanded a ring mold, something with architecture. When unmolded, it would quiver on the plate like a captured life form, red and glossy and vaguely threatening. The center got filled with chicken salad or shrimp salad. Serving tomato aspic required confidence. You'd present it like you weren't serving savory jello, a leaf of lettuce underneath, a dollop of mayonnaise on top. People would take tiny portions, testing it. But then, the surprise. It was refreshing, complex. The tomato and lemon playing together, the vegetables adding texture. They'd come back for seconds, these converts to the Church of Savory Gelatin. Tomato aspic died when we decided soup should be hot and salad should be raw, and never the twain shall meet. Perfection Salad won first prize at the 3rd Knox Gelatin Cooking Contest in 1905 and haunted American tables for the next 70 years. It was cabbage and celery and peppers suspended in lemon-lime gelatin. Betty Crocker kept it alive through 3 wars and a depression, insisting it was crisp, refreshing. Perfect for summer luncheons, the recipe required precision. The cabbage had to be shredded thinner than hair, the celery diced smaller than baby teeth. Everything got blanched for exactly 1 minute. The gelatin was unflavored, mixed with vinegar and sugar and just enough salt to make you question everything. Real perfection. Salad was clear as glass, the vegetables suspended like they were floating in space. Unmolding perfection. Salad was like diffusing a bomb. Too warm, and it would collapse. Too cold, and it would stick. When it worked, that perfect release, that gentle thwop. You'd step back and admire it. Baked Alaska was the ultimate finale, a dessert that required a blowtorch, a prayer, and the kind of confidence that came from 3 martinis or genuine insanity. It was ice cream covered in cake, covered in meringue, then set on fire. Betty Crocker tried to domesticate it, insisting you could make it with a very hot oven instead of a torch. But everyone knew baked Alaska without flames was like a magic show without magic. The construction was engineering. First, a layer of pound cake, then ice cream, 3 flavors minimum. Vanilla, strawberry, and chocolate, or if you were fancy, pistachio and raspberry. The ice cream had to be brick hard, frozen in a bowl lined with plastic wrap, so you could unmold it in one piece. Meringue was where heroes were made. 7 egg whites, whipped until they could hold a penny, gradually adding sugar until the mixture was glossy as fresh snow. You'd spread it over the ice cream dome, making sure every inch was covered. Then, the flames. Whether from a blowtorch or a trip under the broiler, you'd brown that meringue while the ice cream stayed frozen inside, this miracle of physics that made no sense but worked every time. Serving baked Alaska required speed and spectacle. You'd carry it to the table flaming if you were using brandy. The first cut revealed the layers, that Neapolitan cross-section. Everyone would applaud because baked Alaska demanded applause. Baked Alaska died when we decided setting dessert on fire was dangerous, which it was, when ice cream cakes became things you bought at Dairy Queen, when the effort-to-enjoyment ratio tipped too far toward effort. Ham salad spread was what happened to Easter ham on day 4, when even the dog was starting to look at it suspiciously. You'd grind it up in that metal grinder that clamped to the counter and sounded like you were destroying something important, add mayonnaise and sweet pickle relish, and suddenly that ham had new life. Betty Crocker's recipe called for leftover ham, but everyone knew ham salad spread was the reason you bought a ham in the first place. You'd get maybe 6 slices of regular ham before converting the rest to spread. The grinding was crucial. Too coarse, and it was just chopped ham pretending to be salad. Too fine, and it became ham pâté. The perfect grind was the size of rice grains. The mix-ins divided families. Team Mayo insisted on Hellmann's. Team Miracle Whip claimed the tanginess was essential. Swiss insisted on adding ground Swiss cheese. The Rebels added hard-boiled eggs. You'd pack it into a crock, everyone had a crock specifically for ham salad, and smooth the top like you were spackling a wall. A sprinkle of paprika on top, because paprika made everything look intentional. Franks and Crescents were pigs in a blanket's sophisticated older cousin who went to community college and came back saying Frankfurter instead of hot dog. These used full-size hot dogs cut into quarters, wrapped in triangles of crescent roll dough, and served with a honey mustard sauce that contained actual mustard seeds. Betty Crocker insisted these were perfect for casual entertaining. But everyone knew Franks and Crescents were for when your in-laws visited, when you needed to prove you could elevate the humble hot dog into something worthy of the good china. The hot dogs had to be all beef, because serving mystery meat to guests was something your mother might do, but you had standards. You'd score them in a crosshatch pattern before cutting, partly for better dough adhesion, but mostly because it looked professional. The wrapping technique separated the amateurs from the artists. Each quarter franc got wrapped in a triangle of dough, but not just wrapped, swaddled, with the dough tucked and stretched to create maximum coverage while maintaining the signature Pillsbury layers. The honey mustard was homemade. Mayonnaise, yellow mustard, honey, and mustard seeds that would get stuck in your teeth but proved you cared about texture. Some people added horseradish, which was aggressive. The correct answer was a drop of hot sauce. They'd emerge from the oven golden brown and puffed with pride, the dough layers separated and flaky, the hot dogs sizzling inside their pastry sleeping bags. You'd arrange them on a platter with the honey mustard in a small bowl in the center. Franks and crescents died when we admitted hot dogs were hot dogs, no matter what we called them or how we dressed them. When artisanal sausage became a thing and suddenly our frankfurters weren't frank enough. When we stopped needing intermediate foods between kid food and adult food. These weren't just recipes. They were love letters written in gelatin and mayonnaise. Each dish carried DNA from an era when effort was currency, when your reputation rose or fell on a ribbon salad, when spending 6 hours on a cheese log meant you cared. They disappeared not because they were bad, but because the world that needed them vanished. We lost the democracy of the potluck, the grace in serving something that took all day but would be gone in an hour. Somewhere right now, someone's unmolding a jello salad. The vacuum seal breaks with that satisfying pop. And for just a moment, everything is perfect, everything is possible, and Betty Crocker is smiling from that great test kitchen in the sky.